This coalition's proposed laws against gangs are draconian, trampling on some very basic freedoms and rights. They're going to have a huge traumatic impact on those people and their families. It's also a very concerning precedent. As we know, governments always try out more extreme forms of control on otherized groups in order to gain public acceptance. There are less than 9,000 people in gangs. It's a very small, very demonized group of people, thanks in large part to state media. So the government expects us to let this slide. The proposed legislation is described by the Law Society as having a singular policy objective of improving public confidence in law and order. This means they have no intention of improving anything, simply people's perception. This bill gives police new powers to issue dispersal notices, telling people to leave an area and not associate with each other in public for 7 days, and creates new crimes for people not obeying these orders. Police can issue dispersal notices for simply suspecting that someone is a gang member, even if they're not doing anything wrong at all. And if they don't comply, the police can arrest them. This goes completely against the presumption of innocence that we like to think is enshrined in our law. There is a limit. The police can't make people disperse from immediate family. But as the Law Society states, the definition risks being applied in a Western-centric way that could impact communities who have different views on who they consider their family to be. The bill also makes it a crime to display gang patches in public, again criminalizing people even if they're not committing a crime. And more recently, last-minute changes to the bill has extended this prohibition to certain people's homes. If an individual is convicted of displaying a patch and has 2 or more offenses within the past 5 years, they're not allowed to have any gang insignia anywhere, including in their private home. And that's not just gang patches. Gang insignia is so wide that it includes memorabilia, a painting, or even something in a book that's owned by someone else in the house. And if you breach these orders, you could be sent to state cages for up to a year. The Law Society called out the undemocratic move of adding this after public consultation. They said these changes exasperate the rights infringements already identified in the existing bill by seeking to regulate a person's private home, even if they do not intend to display the insignia in a public space. Noting this went against the purpose of the bill itself. Families and others living with people facing these orders will be subjected to repeated searches, which are likely to be disruptive, invasive, and particularly traumatic for the children. The changes allow police to search the entire property and likely result in the closets, underwear drawers, and other private areas of whānau being searched. There's a risk of disruptive searches being used as a method of punishment and deterrence, which goes against the legal basis of search powers, which are for collecting evidence. These are extreme breaches of some very basic freedoms. Being able to wear what you want, to have what you want in your house, to associate with and to live with whoever you want without intrusion from the state. And when you consider the history of gangs in this country, the whole story becomes a whole lot more sinister. As was once again highlighted in the Abuse and Care report, gangs grew out of colonization. 80 to 90% of members in prominent gangs were taken from their communities by the colonial state as children, where we know the conditions were hellish and many experienced the worst kinds of abuse that you can imagine. These children had no one else but each other. They were each other's families, and forming a gang was their form of resistance to state violence. And today, instead of seeking justice and healing, the state is continuing to inflict violence on these same people. Intrusive police searches are violent. Placing people in metal cages is violent. Separating people from their community is violent. And it will only increase the trauma and therefore harm in our communities. As we saw in Australia, their anti-gang legislation increased crime. This evidence was presented by the Law Society and the government is ignoring it. You'd be forgiven for thinking that they want to increase crime and the number of prisoners, and perhaps warm us up to more draconian limits to our basic freedoms and rights.